Catalyst 2030 started life as a WhatsApp group among social entrepreneurs, connecting to envision real transformational change. Launched at the World Economic Forum in January 2020, it's grown into a global movement accelerating change to ensure the SDGs are reached by 2030. Fueled by passion, our 550 members working in 175 countries have collectively put in an amazing 50,000 volunteer hours, touching the lives of 2 billion people. And we're driven by values, to which we hold ourselves accountable. 2020 was a busy year, co-creating 3 reports with partners and producing one of our own. Inviting high-level guests to participate in the Catalyzing Change campaign, hosting fireside chats and expert hours, which will be continuing in 2021. To celebrate our achievements, together we placed our supporters in the limelight with the first Catalyst 2030 Awards for Systemic Change. With the blessing of the Dalai Lama, we celebrated finalists and winners in the following categories: special recognition for our early supporters, individual philanthropists, donor organizations, philanthropic intermediaries, corporate organizations, bi- and multilateral organizations, and 4 regional winners in the category of national governments. And now on to Catalyzing Change Week 2021. During this social entrepreneur-led event, we bring together diverse stakeholders in over 100 sessions to showcase their systems change efforts and the best practices that can accelerate our work in pursuit of the SDGs.
So a very warm welcome to everybody for this brilliant session, which is going to be about inspiring global women, a call to action at Catalyst 2030. We've got 4 brilliant speakers, and I'm aware in all these sessions at Catalyst that how much strength there is amongst the participants. So I am looking forward, thank you all of those of you who've put your videos on and to see your faces, looking forward to hearing your inputs, both in the first half hour of our discussion, in our breakout rooms in the 15 minutes afterwards, and then hearing back from you in the latter half of our hour together. I'm Emily Kasriel. I'm really delighted to be hosting. I want to say we'll be recording the event, and I'm sure it's going to be so compelling that the only reason you're going to be picking up your phone is to tweet using the hashtag accelerating action, all one word. So in the first half hour, we're looking at identifying barriers for women social entrepreneurs, structural, systemic, recognizing the diversity of women social entrepreneurs, inclusive of the racial, sexual, religious nuances, and not assuming that they're all white cis women, because we're here to talk about the pathways to change. And it's so critical to do this because we know about, all of us, the role that women social entrepreneurs can make, perhaps a deeper impact than their male counterparts, because they look to scale deeply, spreading ideas locally, more likely to influence norms as part of their strategy. And we know that the social entrepreneur sector is still very dominated by men, often white men. Fundraising and networking is easier for them, and they tend to be listened to more. So what does it take to create a really inclusive environment where true diversity of social entrepreneurship, women can flourish and bring the systemic change that's really needed? So we've got the pioneering panelists, and I want to introduce each of them in turn, and then I'm going to ask them in 60 seconds, and please help me with the timekeeping, to tell us about the most inclusive environment that they've either witnessed or been part of or dreamt of for women social entrepreneurs. And I want to kick off first by introducing Rana Dajani, who's got an extraordinary CV, like everybody here, but especially pertinent here, the founder and the director of We Love Reading organisation, championing the power of reading in a child's education and encouraging them to read for pleasure. Winner of an array of awards, including the UNESCO Literacy Prize, but also a professor of molecular cell biology after studies and fellowships and teachings at a host of universities in her native Jordan and across America and beyond. And you've talked, Rana, about absorbing your mother's value of wanting to make a difference, but your identity as just a human being doing what I think is right. So tell me, Rana, in 60 seconds, what is your inclusive environment?
Well, thank you for having me as part of this panel. This is something we try to imagine what it could look like in the future, and that we can be active actors to make it happen. But reflecting back, I think I felt hints of it when I sit with the local people in my neighborhood and listen to these everyday people who you pass on the street and you don't think who they are. And then you listen to how they've identified their own struggles and how they have come up with simple solutions with such humbleness and with such listening to each other, trusting each other, and feeling this empowerment that, no, I'm going to solve this for myself and not waiting for somebody to come and save them. These people exist. I've seen them. I've sat with them and listened to them. And to me, how can we bring that up to the surface so that everybody, every neighborhood, every group of people sees themselves, have that agency to go forward and take control of their lives and become change makers in their own right as every individual. And that way we kind of change the whole world.
Wow, what a beautiful minute there, Rana, about neighbours trusting and listening and empowering themselves to become agents. That is really fantastic. Thank you. Looking forward to hearing more. So next off, Ndidi Nwuneli, and you describe yourself as a serial social entrepreneur, founder and managing partner at the Shale Consulting, Agriculture and Nutrition, shaping agricultural policy in private, non-profit, public sectors, founder of a food company, Ace Foods, processes nutritious food from the best of West Africa, and also the founder of Leap Africa, an NGO who works across Africa, inspiring next-gen leaders. And you started your career as a consultant at McKinsey with an MBA from Harvard. So let's hear your 60 seconds, Ndidi.
Well, I'd say that I was fortunate to be born in a family where I experienced inclusion, respect, and equity. But to find environments where I experienced that as an adult has been a little more difficult. And as a Black woman, an African woman, in many settings, I walk in, I have to prove myself over and over again. And so I believe that in this 1 hour, we are going to create that inclusive environment and together think through what it will take to build bridges across races, religions, and ethnicity.
Thank you very, very much. It is sad, isn't it, that even though in your home you felt so free and then you had to overcome these barriers all the time throughout the amazing career. That is tough. And that's what's exciting about coming together and to really come up and help begin to start to think about a blueprint. Next guest, Shivani Garg Patel, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at the Skoll Foundation, not the Skoll World Forum, just to correct the bio. After working there as a principal, also early work as a strategy consultant at McKinsey again, and extensive education in electrical engineering and computer science and a Harvard MBA, also working in Grameen Foundation, the World Bank, the WHO, and the co-founder and managing director of an NGO working in local medical, working to invest in local medical providers to people in poorer communities across the globe. So tell me, Shivani, your 60 seconds.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you for including me in this really important conversation. Before the Skoll Foundation, you mentioned, Emily, that I was led and founded a nonprofit. And before I did that, I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur or able to do that. I always thought, oh, I'm a good number two. But with a lot of support and encouragement, I did take that leap, but found that in the early days of running the organization, there were many hard moments, challenges around fundraising, a lot of what we'll get into here, challenges to just build that momentum, and the self-doubt continued to sort of creep in. And after much too long, I connected with a few fellow women entrepreneurs actually who were in similarly early stages of their work and found so many shared experiences, the highs, the lows, the challenges, the wins. And there was so much solace in knowing that I was not alone in my experience. And so in hindsight, it's so obvious, but it was such an inclusive and accepting space, this group of women entrepreneurs, that I returned to them many times since to commiserate, share, learn from, and people that I hold near and dear. And just a final point on why this felt inclusive, I think it was because there was a real embrace of my lived experience and a connection with others in a shared experience.
Thank you very, very much, Shivani, and for your honesty and openness, and I think setting a great standard for the conversation today, talking about community and connecting, which has meant so much to you then, but continues to do so now. And lastly, and certainly not least, Kyle Zimmer, the founder of First Book, a social enterprise providing books to low-income communities across the US, but now in Canada, Peru, Haiti, and India and Jamaica, almost 30 years ago, but continues to lead an organization which has evolved to look at education as the best way out of poverty for children in need. And now her network serves over 500,000 educators to themselves serve kids in need, and a real commitment to partnership and innovation, a passionate social entrepreneur advocate, and sits on numerous boards in her role, as well as a prior life as a corporate attorney. And also, similar to Rana, you draw on your mother's fierce belief in social justice as a key motivator. So can we hear your 60 seconds, please?
Of course, it's great to be here and see so many good friends. And also just to know that this forum is exactly what we need to do. Like, we need to talk about this. We need to talk about it. And because I think a lot of us know and have stumbled over these barriers in our lives. But to your point earlier, this isn't something that it doesn't come up in daily life. You know it's there, but it's sort of a threat that chases you around from fundraising to business design. I think the most inclusive environment I have ever experienced was corporate law. I'm kidding. That was a joke. That was the least inclusive. The most inclusive actually has been Ashoka. I've known Bill Drayton for decades and decades, and I've been on the board for more than 20 years over at Ashoka. And I've traveled the world with Bill, and I've seen him interact with men and women. I've seen him interact with tribal communities and corporate leaders and political leaders, and I have noticed how wonderfully open he is, and how inclusive he is, and how respectful he is. And what that translates into, you can see it in the leadership of the organization, from the board to the past and current presidents, and the highest level of the organization. He's included women every step of the way, including me.
I wanted to ask, really, any of you who want to jump in, what is it that what do we think is the most important step that needs to be taken to create the sorts of environments that you have spoken about in different aspects in your minute? What do we feel is the most critical thing that we need, a barrier we need to overcome? Any thoughts? I mean, Shivani, sorry, actually, I'll go to Rana. You talked about the whole question of identification as a social entrepreneur and the way that women sometimes perhaps don't identify. Do you want to tell us more?
Yeah, so I think that to answer your question using that, I think there's 2 points that we need to take into consideration. One is that women themselves need to see themselves and perceive themselves as change makers, and not just that, oh, this is what I do, this is normal. No, it's not. It's amazing. It's wonderful. And so how do you help women identify themselves as such? One way to do that is to talk about them, talk about their stories, so that they see somebody who's doing exactly what they're doing being celebrated, and then think, so I can be that way too. I'm important, I matter. And not that she doesn't think she's important, but just to celebrate her actions that become mainstream rather than just, things that you always do and they're just mundane. But on the other hand, we don't want to put all the responsibility on the woman, right? We want also hold responsible those people who are in charge of these networks or these fundings or mechanisms or institutions, and to make sure that they are inclusive. And that there are women, and that there's maybe start with a quota, that we need to have a percentage 50-50, which is the population of the globe, of women, and find those women. They exist. It's just that people don't have the energy to go and actually find them. But when they know they have to, because it's mandated, or indirectly, like what Catalyst has done, put up awards to force people to be recognized and make them do the actions that we want them to do. So I think it takes both sides to work to get those barriers down and to have women more visible. And we can talk later about how do you talk about these women, how do you celebrate them? Again, that's an important point. Most role models we see are women coming from the West, and we need to have more women who come from different groups, of course, ethnicities, religions, backgrounds, how they dress, how they speak. So language becomes another barrier that needs to be overcome. And for example, in the MENA region, where I come from, people speak Arabic, the majority speak Arabic. English is a second language. So just that language barrier creates a barrier to be included in any of these forums and discussions, because they don't understand the language to participate. And always the onus is on them to know the language, and nobody provides translation. So this is something we're advocating. The onus should be on those organizations to provide, for them to have a translator, not the woman to have a translator.
Wow, that's a lot of things there already, Rana, and that is so fantastic. And by the way, in case you guys just think you're having a relaxing time watching, on the half hour, you're going to go in breakout rooms, and you are going to have to really, develop what you guys as a breakout room think are the most important steps that need to be taken by others to advance this agenda. So you can already start thinking and taking notes. Shivani, I noticed that you were nodding there.
Yeah, and I know Ndidi wanted to get in there too. I think based on what Rana said and building on that, I would say, how can we reframe what success looks like and what skills drive change, right? If we look at, driving durable, lasting change at a systems level, however, we think about durable, lasting change, what are the skills that actually get the job done? And sort of reframe maybe some of these biases or ideologies that we have of what that looks like, given some of what we've seen as sort of prototypes. And so in addition to celebrating other kinds of prototypes, because I wholeheartedly agree with that, Rana, I think it's also how do we reference and spotlight these women in sort of upholding and sharing these different kinds of approaches to driving change. And it's not that women are a monolith, right? There's diversity in there too. So how can we show the different types of leadership models, skill sets, approaches that actually can drive that change? And I think we need to think about spotlighting those stories, those approaches, supporting them, funding them, partnering with them. And then I think the other piece to this is, how do you build the scaffolding to really help the early stage, those, the women at sort of the start of the funnel, if you so to speak, to be encouraged to actually feel like it's possible, right? Like that they, like Rana said, see themselves. So how do we create more mechanisms to fund those earlier stage entrepreneurs and give them the access to the networks? And I think working through intermediaries who can have that more proximate local touch point is something that we've been thinking a lot about, and I think a lot about as well.
That's fascinating. That's a real concrete thing in terms of the intermediaries. And Jeru has just posted on the chat how Catalyst, by the way, to answer to your point, Rana, is engaging in providing translation and hopes to do much more next year. And please, everybody, use the chat, and I'll bring in stuff, elements from the chat. And if you want to bring in and make a point too, you're very, very welcome. Ndidi, you wanted to say something.
Yes, thank you so much. And we can see that my sister was being inclusive by noticing that I wanted to say something. So thank you. And that's part of it, right? The first point is that we have to look out for each other in very concrete ways and really serve as each other's biggest champions. Mm-hmm. And I learned this actually very early in my career at McKinsey. We had a group called Black Client Service Staff. The few Black people at McKinsey, I joined McKinsey in 1995. So very few Black people back then in the office. And one of the things we used to do was say, we have to talk each other up. We have to be each other's champions. Jeru is a champion for so many of us. But in our ecosystem, in the social enterprise network, how do we serve as champions deliberately and subtly? The second is really about data and information. I think what drives the lack of inclusion is a loss of ignorance. People are afraid of people who are not like them. They don't know who they are. They don't understand their cultures. They have biases. And I realized, especially with race, that there's so much ignorance about race. I happen to be biracial. My mother is white, my father is Black. And that helped me understand race from a very early age and serve as a bridge between different races, but also to contend with racism at a very young age. So understanding race and class and gender, I think we have to do a lot more writing. We have to use media a lot more. And Emily, that's why your roles are very important. We have to change narratives. And I think the social entrepreneurs have to embed communications and policy into everything they do. And also grant makers have to change how they engage to enable part of our work to be devoted to knowledge creation, measurement and evaluation, data, and actually changing public perception and public opinion. And I've started doing that very actively. And that's why I've been writing books on social innovation in Africa and food entrepreneurs in Africa, because I realized that a lot of the narrative about Africa was being shaped by non-Africans who had spent 2 weeks on the continent and became authorities. And that those who were on the continent didn't write and didn't share and didn't own the narrative. And so the onus is on us to share that knowledge and change narratives, but we also have to ensure that our partners, our funders also join us in the battle.
That is so powerful, the story about narrative. And afterwards, I want to go around to data. And of course, Kyle, your work is on reading, but reading and writing, they're joined together, aren't they, in terms of skills?
Yeah, actually, our work is not just reading. You know, we really view education as the full gamut, but that's a conversation for another day. I was just going to say, I love the conversation about mentorship. I think it's critically important, and it can be formal, as you've described, Ndidi, and it can be informal. You know, I have hosted pre-COVID, of course, a series of dinners in New York that are all women, and we announced it as the Global Association of Smart, Funny, and Exhausted Women, and we had these dinners 3 times a year, and it was a huge array of people, social entrepreneurs, people in business, all women, and we did threaten at one point to have an auxiliary men's group, but that never really took off. But but I think it can be playful, it can be hopeful, you know, and I think one of the things that I love about this session is the hope. I think one of the things we can recognize is that this issue allows us to reach over country lines, over cultural lines, not to ignore those lines, not to ignore the barriers that race and culture present, but to elevate everybody. You know, there's, I think, a presumption that things are different in the US, and that, you know, the last time I looked at the data, there's something like 81 countries that have had women as elected leaders, and we are celebrating that for the first time with Kamala Harris as the vice president, I just want to say, not the president, but you know, so when you look at that, when you look at the fact that, you know, there was a study like 6 years ago that showed that there were more men named John who were CEOs than there were women named anything. And, you know, it's just an extraordinary chasm. And I think it gives us the opportunity to reach over to say, this is an issue that transcends country barriers, that every country in the world is failing at this and is failing at elevating the talents and leveraging the talents of 50% of their population, to Rana's point. And, you know, but what an opportunity if we organize.
That's such a brilliant point, Kyle. And I'm thinking particularly around this community, the community of social entrepreneurs, and even among the top social entrepreneur programs, you know, Ashoka, Schwab, Skoll, women-only social entrepreneurs only get 32 to 42% of fellowships. So there's still some way to go. What is it, do you think, that we need to be asking for in this blueprint? What do we need to be demanding, and where do the change needs to be made? You were talking earlier, Shivani, about the pipeline and the importance of nurturing a really strong pipeline. What do we think are the most critical factors for us to really move the needle here?
Maybe I can jump in and say, well, first of all, we need trust. To trust people, which is to the points that were already made, but maybe putting a word to it. To trust the people, trust women, trust people from ethnic backgrounds, trust other countries, like Ndidi had said, they know better, and I think and listen. So those two, but the other point is also this educating, raising awareness. The ignorance that Ndidi mentioned is we should include men as well, because they're the ones who are perpetrating what's happening. So we also need to bring them into the conversation, raise their awareness, and make them responsible by giving them more data, more information, and empowering those men who want to do things, but also may be marginalized as well and not considered mainstream, which is to the point I can't emphasize enough what was said about writing the narrative and celebrating the diversity. I wrote a book called 5 Scarves, Reimagining Success. If we can reverse cell fate, you know, when you can take an adult cell and turn it back into a stem cell, this was considered crazy a few years ago until somebody said, why not? Who said so, right? So we accept things as they are, and we need to have the courage and the confidence to, you know, just be crazy and challenge all of these. And the only way to do it is through narrative, because that way you leave a legacy for future generations. We're not going to solve all the problems in this generation. We know that. So we have to be practical, but we can plant those seeds by writing and sharing. And that's when I say every woman, every man, every human being has a unique story to give to the world. And just to write it and share it, and that boosts your agency. You're feeling that you can be a change maker. And I think that's one way where it's about system change and going to the pivotal points. So if we can work on that, we may not see the results immediately, but we know that that's the long vision going forward to the future.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Rana. And again, please share your thoughts in the chat. I just want to very briefly also to look at the funding. If people have points to make, because obviously that's a very, very critical factor when it comes to women's social entrepreneurs being able to, you know, you talk, Rana, about people, neighbors discussing, and that's fantastic. But when to move on to the next stage, you know, what is the change that needs to happen here? And Ndidi.
Yes, so I definitely believe funders have a critical role to play, and I happen to sit on some philanthropic boards and on the board of the Africa Philanthropy Forum. And one thing I've been pushing personally is that every funder needs to track what percentage of their funding goes to local organizations, and deliberately ensure that every organization they fund has an equitable number of women and locals on their boards. And if as a catalyst, we also hold them accountable and even encourage them to report these numbers, we will see a change in funding flows. I have noticed over the past few years, I always go on the boards, the websites of organizations, and I see the boards of the organizations that are receiving lots of money, and they don't include many people of color, they don't include many women, and where the organizations include women, they're in very low positions. Where they include people of color, they're in the lowest positions in the organizations, and nobody should tell me they can't find talent. There's great talent everywhere, but if it's not measured, it doesn't matter. And so Catalyst, I'm appealing to us to take this on as a key deliverable, that we push all the funders to actively track and report on these numbers.
That is fantastic. That's a really strong, actionable insight. So we are now going to be putting everybody, including our speakers, into breakout rooms. I'd be grateful if somebody nominates themselves or somebody else as a scribe to then be able to feed back the information. And the key question we're going to be asking in these rooms is, how do we accelerate action in this space? what needs to change. And the more specific you can be, that really helps, because afterwards we're going to be sharing the information. And I think that we're going to be putting a link in the chat for you to take notes in the Google Sheet, so that we'll be able to collect and harvest all these ideas and make sure we don't leave them in the room, but take them forward as part of the blueprint for Catalyst 2030. So if I could ask one of the magicians to put us in our breakout rooms, and you can see the Google Doc over there, and have fun. And I look forward to seeing you at 2:15.
They're all coming back. Some rooms are still going, crikey.
Well, you did give us 9 minutes to solve a problem that has plagued mankind since the dawn of the species. So I can imagine they might have wanted 30 or 40 more seconds.
Yeah. Biology, we don't know it's about the dawn of the species, maybe a little bit after. Maybe they started off okay. It was just later. I'm the biologist, right?
There you go. All right. 5 or 10 minutes after that, then. Yeah.
We've got everybody into the room, and thank you so much. So in about a minute and a half, it would be great if we start to hear from the different rooms to share to the whole group, what steps do we need to create the environment for social entrepreneurs, which is inclusive of women, in their full diversity. Who needs to take them, and what are we asking of donors, foundations, and political actors? So could we go to group 1 first of all? And remember the hashtag accelerating action if you think of and hear anything brilliant. And again, please feel free to contribute in the chat as well, and we'll be capturing and saving that and those thoughts. So did group 1 have a scribe and somebody who could share?
I was our scribe, but I'm happy to have any member of group number 1 please jump in. I can start to kick us off with some highlights. I think just echoing kind of a lot of what we heard, I think there was to be additive, our session in our group talked a lot about kind of coming to this challenge with fresh eyes and acknowledgement that maybe we don't have the answers, because there's an opportunity to think differently, and maybe even ask different questions. We talked about the importance of measurement, and the opportunity that even Catalyst could play, Catalyst 2030 could play in providing a benchmark across a sample of funders in terms of the percentage of funding going to women entrepreneurs, and as Ndidi laid out, to even their leadership teams and boards, et cetera. And communicating sort of new ways of thinking about measurement as well was another piece on that. The changing the narrative was another one that we talked a lot about, and creating the importance of creating spaces like this for inclusion, and also to highlight and spotlight other kinds of models. The other thing was around just taking action where we can as individuals, but also in trying, wherever we have, move with intentionality, and then also think about how we can influence efforts that are emerging around women-focused funds, et cetera, how we can help influence representation in decision-making tables, bringing more men into the conversation and the solution, looking at the whole pipeline, and then finally, not being scared of speaking out and acting in these moments where it can make a difference.
Wow, that's a full, group 1 was pretty busy over there solving the world in amazing insights. And it would be great that people in group 1, as in all the groups, could continue to be part of this conversation and help shape Catalyst 2030 blueprint. So can I come to group number 2? To our scribe, Sue.
Right. Actually, I don't know that we have group number 2. Anyway. So we're very specific in the discussion. So with Emily's leadership, the blueprint for Catalyst 2030, it's to start off with have an assessment, to do a reality check of our network, and what's the ratio leaders in terms of women and men, I believe, and then or how we try to encourage the operation of different enterprises or NGOs in terms of the ratio of achieving a 50-50 ratio, right? And then trying to celebrate for those who could achieve that. And so and bring in celebration and award for that. And also, before we come up with specific actions, and we also talked about reframing and bring in the change of narratives, bring in men into the conversation more. And also we have a male member in our group. So talking about how to appeal to men is to get personal in terms of the discussion topics, bringing in daughters, fathers relationship so that they will tune into the discussion topic and maybe talking about the benefits from the male perspective. And yep, that's it.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very, very much there, Sue. And group number 3, you might want to guess, because you're one of the groups who hasn't spoken yet. So I don't know, whoever speaks first, group 3 or 4, if you don't know what number you are, please go for it and share. That would be great.
I think we were group 3. And, you know, feel free to jump in, anybody. But one of the things that we talked about was literal representation in like the brochures and the websites and what comes up on Google when you look up female social entrepreneur versus social entrepreneur, and kind of the role that algorithms play in this. And we talked about the example of how kind of the images produced by charitable organizations have changed a lot in terms of representing poverty since the 1980s due to these guidelines that were produced for how do you humanly represent somebody and see them not as an object. And so we talked about kind of revisiting these guidelines and how can we make them more radical and inclusive as well. And yeah, maybe generating new ones or building off of old ones so that, you know, all of the things that we talked about are more reflected because images are kind of a core foundation of power dynamics. So that was one thing that we talked about. And we also talked about the need, similar to everybody else, of funding, and that there are an emerging number of female philanthropists, but how do we get them to buy into inclusion, and how do we get people to view inclusion as something that has a good return on investment? So I think that also comes back to the data point in terms of measuring all of these things. Did I miss anything? Ndidi?
It's such an interesting topic, isn't it, data?
Yeah,
Go on, sorry.
Points just to add, also the importance of female investors and making the business case for inclusion. And that was a great comment from our colleague in Hong Kong. And then there was a comment from an educator about the need to revise curriculum. And that curriculum is so fundamental, especially early childhood and as you move on in defining what inclusion is and what and resetting expectations. And I think, you know, all of you working in education have to really think through that. That's a huge, huge opportunity. It's long term, but it has great rewards. So those were the only 2 points I think I heard from our group. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you. Wow, lots of really brilliant points. And we're capturing this all, by the way. So can we go to group 4 now?
I think that would be us. So we started off from the boardroom to the schoolroom, and I think it was quite a blink of an eye with the time that we had. But literally what we talked about was overcoming gaslighting in the boardroom when you are facing you know, funders and looking for funding and where women are not taken seriously. And I think one of the other comments that was made was around how do we support women through their childbearing years, because they're not taken seriously. You know, opportunities are limited because the eventuality is that they would leave to go and start families. And then we also talked about, and I think we picked that up from Ndidi's point around funding, demystifying cultural norms of patriarchy. And that's particularly, you know, the case in Africa, and particularly maybe even poorer communities or countries. And some of the strategies that we come up with is to look at the root causes, because it's not just out there in the boardroom. It starts in families, and it starts, you know, with cultural norms. So we discussed also around the school systems and how to bring reform to education and to elevate the status of women. And the last point we also discussed was gender bias in the home and in school. And so the responsibility is given to young girls. And I know this is an age-old issue, but if, where will it start, and where will we start to actually implement change if we don't start addressing the school system, which I think you already picked up on in one of the other groups as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for all of those thoughts, which are so rich, and it feels like just the beginning of a conversation. And I want to turn now, just before we end, just very briefly to each of our panelists to ask them something that they hadn't really thought of before they entered this room together an hour ago, that they want to think more about in terms of creating that environment and steps they might want to take and what they feel is most important. Rana, can I come first to you?
Great. Okay, so what I see distilled from this conversation and this great network is we need to reimagine success in the sense how we measure it, what it looks like. Measuring meaning it's not the typical business, money, power, but using other storytelling, I don't know, something different, innovative. In terms of multiple roles, we all have roles. I do 3-4 things, and I'm sure everyone does, but we don't talk about them. So to celebrate the multiple roles that we can have, and changing roles throughout our lifetime, not to be stuck in one. Nobody talks about that. And especially this becomes very important for women, because usually most fellowships at 40, you have to be younger than 40, but women have a biological clock and they're having kids before 40. So they're using a measure that's made for men and implementing it on women. So changing all these related to how do you measure success together. And I'm just going to end with, to celebrate every human being, because yes, this is a problem with women, but it's a problem in every minority group across the board. It's just that the woman is the biggest one because they're 50%. And so if we address this, we are addressing everything at the same time, celebrating our individual humanity. Nobody's DNA is like anyone else. And everybody counts. I think we need to also celebrate that we don't have to do big changes. It's the butterfly effect. When a butterfly flutters its wings, it moves the wind a centimeter. There's a hurricane in a time and space we can't imagine. So be the butterflies.
That's so exciting to think of all the butterflies in this room and what might happen at the start because of these conversations. Can I come to you, Kyle?
Sure. I think there are sort of two things I want to make sure I spend some time thinking about. One is the point that's been made repeatedly about data, and so First Book runs a research arm called First Book Research and Insights, and I want to think about how we can apply that research arm to this issue. I want to spend some time on that. And secondly, is about speaking out. And I think that's a really tough thing to do because everyone's afraid they're going to get marginalized, whether it's a boardroom or a funder or any place else. And I think we need to look how many brilliant people are right here with us today. Surely we can think of some graceful ways to raise it without, and minimize the risk of further marginalization. But I think we got to say it. We got to say it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And can I come now to you, Shivani? And I think we're allowed to go a minute or two over, I've been told by our woman in charge, Adipa. So yes, I'm getting a yes from her. So Shivani.
Yeah, I'll also follow along with two things. So one is on the measurement as well, in terms of how we look at where we're deploying funding as a philanthropy, which we have, but doing it also in partnership with others. So in sort of that collaborative space so that we can help kind of build the benchmarks and move together, hopefully to increase those numbers. But also that translating that reframing of success that Rana talked about in a way that highlights, right, what do we value in that measurement as well? And so that's another. And then the second piece is around intentionality. So I'm, as Kyle said, the intentionality that I bring in the conversations that I'm, able to be in, and how I can use those spaces and those places and platforms to move this, movement and this effort forward. And then also as an organization where I might be able to help and influence, how can we move with more intentionality there?
Thank you for intentionality for you, and I think for all of us. Ndidi.
Thank you. First, it's been a pleasure and a privilege to spend time with amazing women. And there are two things I'm going to be taking away. One from my subgroup was this whole concept of who is not at the table and how do we represent them with respect. And I think it's a challenge for all of us as we move up in society and gain respect and gain awareness. How do we ensure that for all the women who are not at the table or all the other groups that are not at the table, we represent them and we don't ignore them because we've stepped out of that zone. And I think for me, that's a challenge. It's a challenge because you oftentimes feel like it's a burden and that you can't effectively represent. So there are many, many issues, but I think it's a challenge that I've been reminded of today. And I think all of us owe it to those who are not at the table to find a way to represent their needs, their desires, and their opinions. The second is really this concept of rising together. You know, I offered a gender training on Tuesday for the Ministry of Agriculture. And it was a very tough training. I'm not a gender expert. It was just I was asked to speak. And there's really a fear. There's a fear by men that if women rise, they have less. And you see this in a lot of contexts and it backfires. And I was challenging them that we can grow the pie together. That it makes economic sense, right? But I think all of us need data, more nuanced data by sector to make that point. We can make it holistically, but we need it by sector. We need granular data. And we need more examples and case studies that show that this has been done successfully. And so that's a challenge to all of us to see whether we can fund that type of work and produce that type of work to prove that we can rise together. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure engaging with all of you.
Thank you so much, Ndidi. And the data aspect has come through everybody's data to help create stories, data to make the business case, data to make sure that we're on track, making the changes we need to, inclusivity from the boardroom to the funding decision to who's making the funding decision. And the good thing about data, I think, you know, my sense is that traditionally that's something that men have tended to own and more in the past than women. And it feels like now that it's right time for women for us to be using data to ensure the inclusivity in every respect. But thank you so much, Rana, Dajani, Ndidi, Nwuneli, Zimmer, and Shivani, Garg, Patel. It's been a fascinating conversation, and this is only the beginning. So if you want to be involved, I am going to, Deepa Merchandani is going to put her email in the chat. Take that email and just let her know how you want to be involved and in terms of creating this blueprint for Catalyst 2030 and moving forward beyond this conversation. But I think for everybody here, you've sparked so many thoughts, you in the breakout rooms and all of our panelists. So I'm hugely, hugely grateful. Thank you very, very much. It's been a privilege.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.